Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host, Scott, and this is my co-host, Caleb. Caleb, are you feeling as enthusiastic as me this evening?
I am off. We're off the rails already, and the show hasn't even started. Not a good start.
I wouldn't say off the rails. I would just say like middle-aged dad, tired, goofy.
Yeah, that could be it too.
So, feeling good. We're back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of people who grew up during that era. Caleb, we don't have a guest today, but we decided we wanted to talk about a subject, as we sometimes do, to break up the interviews. And tonight's subject is going to be marriage and divorce. We just thought, why not? It's on our list. It's one we have to maybe prep less for than others. And, still obviously relevant.
Yeah, I think not only relevant because there was definitely teachings on it, but like, even though both of us are still married, but I think marriage and divorce specifically has had a impact on my faith journey just because of some things that have happened around me and just in church settings and in family settings. So I think it is a relevant topic, even though I think some of our core beliefs are probably have some similarities. I think there is an evolution that has happened. I know for me, there definitely is. So I think it's a relevant topic because of that whole idea hooks back to the 90s and teachings that were there and how it has potentially changed or what's still there and connected. So I think it's an interesting topic. I was glad you brought it up.
You're welcome. No, I mean, that's a good place to start. Like coming out of youth group, right? Heading into college. I remember I was like, well, time to find a spouse, probably. And I did. And it was great. And that came true. But, a lot of people come out of youth group with that expectation that they're going to find a spouse. And more people than you think don't. That's okay, of course.
Hi, this is Caleb, the producer of the show, just breaking in like I do every episode to remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this show may not actually be held or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead let people share how they feel. We also know that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remembered the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
Let's just start with kind of that time frame. What did you think marriage was going to be?
The way it was talked about was, it's so great. There are a lot of cliches around it. It's so great. It's the best. I still get weirded out when people especially in Christian circles. I'm not a prude by any means, but like my hot wife, it totally throws me off.
My smoking hot wife.
It's gross. I still, but like the cliches like that, but it's also really hard. And the overarching theme that I think, I don't know if this came up in youth group, but definitely was a Christian theme, is God hates divorce. That is a teaching that I feel like has been with me since high school, easily.
For sure. Avoid divorce at all costs.
Yeah.
Now, and like you heard the stat, and I think the stat is still loosely thrown around, like 50% of marriages end in divorce, which is a scary number. Who knows if that's true? I have no idea. Yeah. But it was a little bit of an intimidation, right? Both you and I are happily married, been married a long time, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And so, yeah, we had a good foundation understanding about it, but there are some things that I don't think I ever got from youth group, which was like, you kind of got to keep working at all the little things all the time and connecting, like find things to connect on. So I will God, I hope she doesn't kill me when I say this, but like Kate and I are opposites. Like we're
Oh, yeah.
opposites in many regards, right? She's a morning person. I'm a night person. She's very funny and smart, and I'm neither. And like all these things are like, there's a lot of things that are definitely opposites about us, but we're still attracted to each other. And maybe she disagrees with that. Maybe, but no, I kid. I say all that to say that I do kind of remember distinctly that there was a teaching that all you need
Hmm.
to make a relationship work is just make sure you marry a Christian person.
Hmm.
Or like that's the most important thing. I'm not saying it's not important. It certainly is. But there wasn't look, how much could they get through to us in youth group? Youth group is not marriage counseling, but
Yeah.
how much of a that's an important piece, but it's going to overshadow everything else and take care of everything else.
Right.
And I
Ooh.
kind of went into it thinking that, and then I neglected to be like, hey, I got to find ways to connect. And that's caused, some difficult conversations, but we worked through it just fine.
You're right. Like this idea of like it's gonna fix everything, that definitely was there. And uh, not to get, I just said I'm not a prude. Like from a sexual side, like that is definitely something that was talked about. Like this idea, because we said at some point we're gonna talk about purity culture. We're gonna try and find a way to discuss that, and because we felt like that would be an interesting topic, but there's definitely that aspect of it too. I think a lot of the focus on it was potentially that conversation around, the sexual nature of marriage. And that was definitely
Mm-hmm.
there. Even in high school, I remember that being a topic of conversation for sure.
And look, that's a big conversation topic. Should be a big conversation topic, secular or
Yeah.
Christian, your sexual health and what that looks like moving forward as an adult. But yeah, and marriage was also almost offered as a solution
Mm-hmm.
for dudes
Yep.
in that regard. And, I don't know very many people who got married young and subsequently got divorced, but I have kind of seen that anecdotally, like get married really young because you don't know any better. And that's not a Christian thing, I guess, per se, but the I don't think youth group always offered the perfect solution to it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was almost kind of a, hey guys, you have a lot of hormones all the time,
Yeah.
and once you get married, it's going to be just fine. And that was another thing that we weren't really taught to work through is how does that look in your
Right.
relationship? And
I don't remember a whole lot of other like conversations around specifically marriage. I just don't, and maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm delusional, or I just put them out of my mind entirely because I just don't remember that in specifically in youth group. Like we didn't have like marriage talk weekends or series on it. I just don't remember any of that at all. So in college
yeah,
more so, I remembered a little. And in
yep.
college is when I Kiss Dating Goodbye hits, and that's a whole other can of
I,
worms. I don't think I'm
I
ready to go into.
forgot about that until you mentioned it.
Yeah,
Oy vey.
Oy vey is right.
That's really Scandinavian. I'm not even Scandinavian. It's just like a Minnesota influence. But yeah, that was definitely a theme, right? There was the purity aspect of
Yeah,
it, right? And
for
that we
sure.
can get into that on that purity culture episode where you had the really good observation is probably the two of us should include a woman on that set from her perspective because we have ours, but that culture really isn't I mean, it is about the male experience, but
I think,
that female experience is pretty rough.
yeah, I think a lot of the damage that was done by purity culture. This is my opinion, and I could be totally wrong. I think a lot of the damage done by purity culture was done to females. I
Hmm.
feel that I could be totally wrong, but that's how I feel. Is you just hear so many horror stories coming out of purity culture from females who just it really messed with them in a lot of weird ways that guys just weren't as impacted by. I think
So that's for another time.
another
But
time, another time.
yeah, that having kind of a simple framework about marriage. And look, does everyone know anything about marriage going into it? No. It's definitely a patience thing and a journey of forgiveness towards each other all the time.
Yeah,
But that divorce stance was very clear.
yeah, for sure. That is one that I remember that God hates divorce. And I still hear it, I mean, to this day. So how old were you when you got married? 24-ish?
2005. I had 24. Yep.
Nailed it. I don't know how
Nice
old
work.
I was. 28, maybe? I don't know. I've been married. I think I was 28.
Hey, fun fact, listener, because there's just one of you, I'm sure. Caleb and I were the best men in each other's weddings.
That is funny, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
that is so cute.
Cute, yeah. I had semi normal hair for your wedding. Not for Bill's. My hair was stupid for Bill's.
Yeah.
It was like platinum blonde.
That was great.
Great. Thanks for that.
How many couples that you kind of grew up with? Because the people that I know, high school, college, that got married, there's by no means a 50% divorce rate among them. It's only a small handful of couples that I knew that have gotten divorced.
Yeah, I'll have to get the Jeopardy music out here while I count. I feel like the number's higher for me.
Secular or Christian, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm not at 50%, but I am at a higher number for sure. I've got some family stuff that has happened. And then it's not necessarily weddings I was in, but it's a lot of young couples that I met in my 20s. That seems to be, I don't know a whole lot of people from high school who have gone through it. I know there's some divorces that have happened from like people who were involved in the church we were raised in or we went to youth group in. Mm-hmm. But I can think of at least 2 or 3, maybe even 4 or 5 couples that I knew as in my 20s when I was at Bethlehem Baptist, and that's going to play a little into this. I was at Bethlehem Baptist, and couples I met and I was in their weddings or I attended their weddings, they're now divorced. I know at least 5 that have.
That's way more than me.
Yeah. So I actually feel like the number's higher than it is. Yeah. And it's not all high school people, but it's kind of that time frame. I can think of at least 5, and then I have some family ones as well. So I can get almost up to 10 of like weddings that I kind of was involved in or my wife was involved in that have now ended. So
I remember talking to a few people early on who might have gotten divorced or divorced and remarried to another person or something like that. And like, you kind of learn early on that, yeah, divorce can be messy, but it's not always like because people hate each other, because there was infidelity or anything. It's just like, sometimes people realize early on, like, this is not going to work out. Let's just, go our merry ways. I'm going to answer this question as I ask you.
Sure.
How do you think then, growing through the kind of early 2000s with that theme and both being in conservative circles, how did that message mature or change? And I'll answer that question on my side first, because I'm very forgetful. I don't want to forget my answer. I remember one of the pastors at a church we went to said, there's a lot of discussion about divorce and whether, what's allowed biblically, what's allowed for divorce. And he made an argument that, and I actually go back and forth on this all the time. He made an argument that if your needs aren't being met, that's a situation where you could start going down that road of, hey, if you're not meeting my needs. And our pastor of that church, definitely conservative. And that struck me as a rather kind of like progressive-ish message, especially for women. And I was like, man, okay, I'll consider that. But I wasn't fully convinced on his exegesis of scripture on it. But like, that's what his claim was, is you can tell throughout the Bible if your needs aren't being met, okay. And ultimately I was like, okay, that's a little too simple, right? Sure. You won't want to try, but I don't know. That was an interesting take that sometimes I still think about, not because I want to get divorced. I absolutely quite the opposite. I just like, is that legit or not?
Yeah.
So that was one take that was new.
That's interesting, just even to hear the variety of takes on it, because I think now I see a lot more variety in the conversation. Like, I think there's a forced variety because I don't know about you, but like, churches just have to deal with it. There's so many people who are divorced that I think I think there probably are churches that still have a hardline stance. You get divorced, you're out of here, don't come back. But I think
Hmm.
so many churches have just had to abandon it. So it has made the variety of opinions on it probably really, really high.
So, what did that look like for you? Like, what are some different takes on divorce that you grabbed?
I was at Bethlehem for a long time. I should have done the math. 15 years. I spent at Bethlehem Baptist, downtown Minneapolis, and then we went to the South campus for a while. And that was where it was a really important time in my life. I mean, obviously, I met my wife there, and all four of our children were born while we were there at Bethlehem. So, very important time. And I do remember in the early 2000s, kind of as I was there, I was like a hardline stance on divorce. Like,
Mm.
and that was Bethlehem's stance, and it still is. Like, divorce is
Under no
basically no
circumstances.
circumstances. Infidelity, they'll be okay with it, but just no. It's just not allowed under basically any circumstance. And which I was totally fine with. No problems. And, we did know people who ended up getting divorced and they just left. I mean, it was just,
Mm.
you didn't hang around. You weren't going to hang around and be a part of the church. And then the reason we left was because of, I'm not going to go into all the details because, again, it's not really my story to tell, but there was a woman who felt like she had legitimate reason to divorce her husband. After 25 years, she was being emotionally abused, which does get tricky. I'm not going to lie, because it is a bit of he said, she said in the end, right? Like, emotional abuse is much more hard to categorize and identify than just straight up physical abuse or sexual abuse. There's just no way around it. But she felt very strongly, and she felt like she tried. And Bethlehem, because of its theology, not just around divorce, but about family and how the structure of the family, just in the end, just ended up siding with him. And it was not all that surprising, but it
Hmm.
was really, really hard to see it happen. And then when she decided, I can't do this anymore. This is enough. I'm filing for divorce and moving on. That was when Bethlehem it got really weird, because they basically, like, she was like, "Well, I'm out of here. I'm leaving the church," and they like wouldn't let her leave the church. And she could leave the building obviously, but they like wouldn't let her cancel her membership. Instead, they had to bring her story before the congregation and vote her out. And it really
Dude.
it really shook my idea of how important is this theology. So it didn't just have an impact on divorce and remarriage and marriage, but it really had this big shakeup for me on this idea of, like, if your theology is just being used to hurt people, what good is it? And that's really where all of a sudden I started to just have this much more broad view of divorce, because it was kind of like, well, crap, life happens. And this felt like a totally legit, like, she had tried really, really hard. We felt like we were the only people who really stood by her, and it was tough because we were trying to stay with her and kind of fight for this idea that she should be listened to and the church should just let this go. I got made fun of in front of like a 500 person meeting, like, where people were talking about it because it was this big thing. I got made fun of by like leaders in the church for having notes, because I was trying to like talk through things I thought we should talk through. So I
Engage.
had notes to prepared that stuff I thought we should talk through, and it was tough. And so it really did open my mind up to the idea that, man, life happens. And yeah, I just, holy cow, like this idea that, like, oh yeah, there's only one way to look at this. That really, really threw me off to the point now where, like, yeah, I still think divorce is not ideal. That's not what I want for any marriage. But at this point, I've kind of said, yeah, if somebody's like, oh yeah, I'm divorced, I'm kind of like, okay, I, that's
Hmm.
fine. I get it. I get it. And life happens and life is complicated. And you said it. You talked about the idea that you and your wife are really different. Me and my wife are in some ways total opposites. Like, the way we do almost everything is very, very different. So I get it. I get that life is hard and marriage is hard. And so that was really a big change for me. And it was the reason we left Bethlehem. because we could not stay anymore in this situation where it felt like not just divorce, but again, that idea of these rules were being used not to build people up, but to break people down. And we couldn't stay anymore. And it was tough. We lost everything when we left. We lost our community that we had for 15 years. Just was kind of gone like that. And we've had very little contact with Bethlehem people since then. And that's really rough. I mean, it was really life changing for us in a lot of ways. So that's not like necessarily divorce theology, but it's divorce having an impact on our lives and kind of our journey of where we are. And we've only in the last year, it's taken us 5 years to get settled at a church again in a lot of ways.
That's a crazy story given that A, I hope that woman is okay. B, like speaks to a lot of patriarchy.
Yeah.
Look, I might say that word and people might roll their eyes or get triggered or whatever, but there's I will, if we need to do another podcast on it, I will, but there's clear evidence of, patriarchalism and that system.
Yeah.
Man is always right, and that leads to different forms of abuse. I'm not speaking just about Bethlehem, it's just in general.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a little bit of a theme for me that when we start sticking up for the oppressed person, that sometimes shakes things on that leadership or that hierarchy up. Look, I understand the theology. The man is the head of the household, Christ is the head of the man. The marriage is a symbol of God's relationship with us, and divorce would mean that symbol or that picture of of love and commitment is broken, and we should avoid it at all costs. I understand the theology, but what you're really saying is when it comes to some of this day-to-day stuff, like you got to be at least willing to listen to other people's experiences and not discount them as a person.
Yep. And like the church we're at, there's a lot of mixed households. Like we've run into more and more people who are on a second marriage, or their kids are it's these are my kids. Actually, my wife's kids from her first marriage. Like we've run into more and more of that, and like it doesn't even shake me. Where I think in 2000, when did I get married? 2007. In 2012, if you would have been like, oh, here's this person who's remarried, like I totally would have had the response of like, oh, not really a Christian, are you? I totally would have, because my stance on it was
That's the part of it, right? Yeah. Is a married a Christian who's divorced should do all things to get back with their spouse.
Yep. And like the idea that if your spouse leaves you, I mean, Bethlehem has a belief that if your spouse leaves you, you don't remarry, no matter what. Like if you're the one who wanted to stay married, the biblical response is to wait for them to return to you, even if they go off and get married to somebody else. Like that, you never remarry. And I think they possibly have loosened that on. I have not been at Bethlehem in 5 years, but that absolutely at one point, that was the response, is that nope, there's no remarriage is just as bad as divorce. You don't do it. And it was like, oh,
hot Calvinist take on marriage.
Yeah.
I think that's probably maybe more extreme than other places, but you're right. Churches do have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And they do have to deal with the reality of people changing over time. I think you had mentioned me and maybe another guest that we had a little while ago that, you're really married to what, 6, 7 different people over your lifetime?
Yeah.
Hopefully the same person, but they change. And look, my wife will tell you that like every 2 years I get like into some new hobby and I'm like, let's do this. This is great. I'm obsessed with this now, and it's probably annoying as heck. But yeah, over time, it's just the natural progression of things.
Yep.
Obviously, whether it's a Christian marriage or a secular marriage, the commitment is to stay committed to that person. If you can work through those changes. They're not always bad.
Yep.
But sometimes it doesn't work. And I'll be honest with you, it's very rare that I've heard or seen of marriages where people just like one thing is hard and they give up.
Yeah.
I think there's this impetus to just be like, well, if something's hard, you don't stop. It's like, no, that woman worked, probably worked really hard to try and talk to her husband for decades to try and get him to change.
Yep.
And other people do work at it. I know people certainly who just have given up, but most of the time, it seems to me that people at least want to try and work it out,
Yeah.
and then it doesn't. And also, too, I think the reality is that sometimes divorces happen and they're ugly, and sometimes they happen and they're not ugly and it's functional and
Yep.
it's not terrible for the. I shouldn't speak. I have never had that experience, and God willing, I never will. But a co-parenting situation where the parents aren't fighting, they're still respectful and functioning for the that probably happens more than we think because it's not the most evil thing that could happen.
Yep.
It's not a great thing, but it's not the most evil thing.
I really think one of the things that came out of that, like God hates divorce theology, is a almost like an idol out of marriage. Like I can see that at times where, when you have that theology that like God hates divorce, man, I love my wife to death. Like I don't want to walk through life with anybody else. But I also like think that when you put it on this pedestal, when you put it on this throne as this accomplishment, it becomes about that. And then it does turn into this. If you didn't succeed in that area, it becomes this, there's no way to not look down on somebody who failed. And you can't have that. If it's the most important thing that these marriages stay together, and when these marriages don't stay together, it's destroying the church and it's destroying the culture. Like there's no way for you to not look down on somebody who who can't figure this out. And so like, I think that's the other part of it is like, I'll hear people talk about marriage and they'll talk about, oh, these people got divorced and it's just the most tragic thing in the world. And yes, is it sad? And yes, is it potentially destructive? But I also feel like my philosophy on church in general at this point is the last thing I want to do is drive somebody away. I'd rather have my doors open and have you here. And so when you make a pedestal out of marriage and then a marriage falls apart, it pushes people out. It pushes people out of a church setting because there's just no way around it. And I really feel like the church should be working really, really hard at the opposite. That is, come ye sinners, poor and needy. That's what we're trying to do here. And marriage, divorce, whatever, get in the door and let's get together. So that, I think that's where it's also thrown me off a lot.
I think idol's an interesting word that can be used for a helpful word, can be applied to many things that are essentially good. And not that being an idol makes it entirely bad, but just view it through the framework of, hey, yes, it can be great. Like we were told it's so awesome.
My smoking hot wife.
It's pretty awesome, but it's also obviously hard sometimes, and like to idolize it doesn't give it its due justice, because I think there is a ton of beauty in, of course, marriages lasting so many years. Look, my parents just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in November. That was amazing, right? And just like, I was so happy for them. Great example of loving each other and staying committed to each other.
Yeah.
And that's what I want, and that's what you want, and that's what most people want.
Yep.
But just sometimes it just doesn't work out. So like to have a blanket statement that all divorce is bad and it portrays Christian love poorly to the secular world, like, come on, it's just stop.
Yeah.
You got to think about the people that of what's happening. And I know that'll kind of maybe gut wrench some people, like, well, then you're sacrificing the theology. And look, fine, let's argue. We can argue theology again on a different podcast.
Well, I can't argue theology. I'm just going to get my butt kicked because I cannot banter with you when it comes to theology.
We can mute you. That's
we should.
Should have done that long ago. But
at the beginning of every show, Caleb, hit the mute button.
Will be muted from now on. And that goes to like singleness too.
Yep.
I saw a pretty funny meme, and I don't want to mean to. It's fine. It's not pointed towards anybody, but the meme was, if you got married before like the year 2000, doesn't it feel like you took the last helicopter out of Vietnam? Like, Like, especially right now, I don't know, my son's not even thinking about it, but he's gonna be 13. He'll be a teenager soon. Like, that kind of stuff has gotta just suck
Yeah.
right now. And I think that people who have not been married or are single for whatever reason can easily, in many church settings, have feel like there's a stigma on them.
Yeah.
And I
Oh,
don't want to
absolutely.
speak for them. I don't know that experience. I just know that at least in my time, in my lifetime, I've seen churches change their message on singleness
Hmm.
to make it softer. Whereas I do think there was this kind of backhanded, like, if you're single, is there something wrong?
Yeah.
And now it's like, hey, it's fine. It's fine if you want to be single, kind of thing. There's plenty of successful single Christian men and women.
Right.
And so, yeah, that it's not as much of a idol in that sense. Where I think, I'm really shooting from the hip now, but 70s, 80s Christianity was like, you get married, dude. Like, that's what you
Yes.
do,
Yep.
because there's a family component too, right? You
Yeah.
got to raise up a bunch of little Christians also. So the singleness kind of being bad kind of stemmed from some of that.
Yeah. It's interesting you mention kids, and like I have been starting to think about this a little, like even just the idea of like, because now we've started to see it in some of our relationships. We've seen just the consequences of this is going to be more on marriage, but the consequences of a poor choice or the consequences of a marriage that doesn't work. And sometimes I this is going to sound really callous. So apologies in advance. Sometimes marriages working or not working, I feel like it's a little luck involved at times. Like you choose this person and they grow into this other person, and you go through conflict or you go through hard times, or the job situation just doesn't quite work out, and
Mm.
that one event has this just avalanche impact on the rest of your marriage, because all of a sudden there's this extra strain that a marriage that, if it wouldn't have had that extra strain, would have maybe survived. And so like
Mm.
there's so many factors in it. But I really have started to notice the idea that for my kids, we have started to talk to them very directly about choosing a spouse is a really important decision. You have to think about who this person is and who they will become, which is really, really hard to do.
It's
At
really hard to
It's
do.
impossible in some ways, but like that's the message that I'm telling my kids is, I'm really thankful that it worked. I mean, me and my wife's name is Missy. We only dated for a year. We didn't even date for a year, I think. I had proposed 6 months into dating. Now we were a little older, and I feel like that helped a little. Again, I got married when I was 28, so we were a little older, and I think we had a better, maybe a little better idea of kind of who we were. I feel like I did have a better idea of who I was at 28 than I was at 18. But it still is like, it feels a little lucky at times that it's working out. Like this, there it is. There's this weird component into it that I can't really even articulate in some ways. And I'm all over the map on that one. Holy cow. Sorry. No point to be made. Mute button. Where are you?
I like blanked out 5 minutes ago. Um,
So did I.
clearly, no. I now we're kind of bouncing back into the marriage talk. You're right, but
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And on the theological end, the example of Christ's love to people is the commitment and loving people no matter what. Now, I'm not ever, of course, like you, going to advocate that you love somebody who's hurting you or abusing you. That's
Yeah.
not that's a different subset of theological questions. But loving that person over time as they change, staying committed does it's not staying committed is not necessarily always like the fun thing to do.
Yeah.
In the end, you're like, yeah, this is great. But in the moment, sometimes you gotta just stay committed as people change and go through things
Yeah.
and just stand by them and all that kind of stuff. And in the end, you get this really incredibly gorgeous version of what it means to love one another.
Yeah.
And that's great. And I can understand why divorce would interrupt that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, a lot of times divorce gives people a chance to also experience it because they're not experiencing it now.
So obviously our opinions of divorce and remarriage and marriage have all changed over the years, but like, you've been married now 20 years? Are you coming up on 20?
20 years. That's right.
Holy cow. So you've been married 20 years. So what's your piece of marriage advice that you would give someone?
Caleb, I know this is going to resonate with you, but my marriage advice is date your wife. No,
Oh man.
no. Oh, that was very inside
Yeah,
baseball.
no, nobody's gonna get that.
Yeah, right.
Oh man.
Um, all right. Honestly, my advice, because there's a bunch of like 18-year-olds who are about to get married listening to this.
Yeah, with the crap.
Yeah, yeah. Are you ready? I've had to learn to have fun
Hmm.
in maybe ways that I'm not always gonna that are not my primary ways of having fun. And I think people who have purposefully have fun together, be willing to try like new stuff so you can have fun and be intentional about it. I continue to need to work on that, but when I realized that, I think it did help. Of course, the follow up podcast like next week is going to be my wife coming on and be like, he didn't, no, but um,
That would be interesting.
that's
Holy cow.
next week. Kate and Missy just host, and we're not even here.
Oh my goodness. I would actually like to I am
We
now interested in
we
making that
don't
happen. Holy
we
cow.
don't get to listen to it until it gets released.
Who's going to edit it?
Oh, good point.
I got to edit it, so I'll get to
Good
listen.
point. No, no. I think having fun together
Hmm.
is pure and simple.
So the reason we got such a chuckle out of the date your wife thing is that because we were prepping, that's one of the things that has actually I feel like that advice is a little shallow, is what I would say. Like that advice at times bugs me because I think for a lot of Christian, a lot of churches, it's become the default advice. Like, oh, you got to go out, you got to date your wife, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I'm not saying it isn't, but I also think it comes with like it's a little more nuanced than that. Like to actually like date your wife, like when you have young kids, to leave the house is hard, and you got to pay for a babysitter. There's a financial component. There's all these other things that come with it. Like even the idea of like a date night every day for a young family or every week for a young family, that is a position of privilege. There's no way around it. You've got to have somebody
Mm,
watch those kids. And so to throw that unnecessary burden upon a marriage, I think can also be problematic. So I'm not saying it's bad advice, but I think when it's the default advice, I struggle with it a little. There are times where I've heard that advice doled out as just straight legalism. Like if you're not doing this, you're not really being a good husband, and I think
mhm.
that's a little BS. I don't appreciate that. Like when it just becomes another thing you must do. So that's my pushback against it. I think it's probably a really good idea. We've not been great about it. I'm not gonna lie. We're just not, and that's probably why I push back against it as well. But that is definitely one that I push back against, and I don't say like don't do it, but I just push into the nuance of it a little because I think
Mhm.
it can be used as a sledgehammer when somebody needs a
It's not
feather.
great blanket advice.
You're right,
Like it needs
exactly.
a
I think your advice is better. The idea of have fun together, find ways to have fun together is a better way of doing it, actually, a better way of talking about it, in my
sure.
opinion. I don't have any real marriage advice. You kind of mentioned it earlier. The thing that's stuck with me the most is, and I got it from Tim Keller, that idea that if you're married for 35 years, you'll be married to 5 or 6 people. That I remember reading that in his marriage book, and it resonated with me so much. Like
Hmm.
it made so much stuff make sense, and it even hearing it tonight is kind of almost calming to me because like I feel like in the last 2 years my marriage has shifted again. We have older kids, we're getting ready to launch kids, and there's this new season that we're going through, and I feel like both me and my wife have this it's been a season of anxiety for both of us in a lot of ways, and it we feel like different people. I'm sure I feel like a different person in the last 2 to 4 years than I was 10 years ago because I've been talking with a physical therapist about my stress problems and my anxiety and how it's giving me headaches and all these things. So I totally can see that, and that really has been the marriage advice that stuck with me the most is you'll be married to different people over the course of your marriage. So
Interesting. Well, we went off on a few tangents on that
yeah.
foray into divorce, but it was ultimately a good palate cleanser for me just to know that, be reminded that, look, people out there deal with that, and there are probably people that maybe even who are listening who are like struggling with that because there's no connection, and that connection piece or that needs piece is something everybody will feel. So
Yeah.
I know that you would encourage it, and I encourage it too. Like, if you need to talk to somebody about it, talk to somebody.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
maybe you need to talk to somebody who is in a professional setting who can help you address stuff with your spouse. Maybe you just need to talk to your spouse. Maybe you do have a down to earth pastor you can talk to.
Yeah.
Like, talk to somebody. So, we of course both encourage anybody who's struggling in marriage to try
Yes.
to their
Yeah.
best, and both parties, right?
Yep.
Because maybe there's certainly times when certainly dudes are just like not going to try.
Yeah.
They give up too easily. Like, both parties obviously have to try. But
Yep.
anyway,
And not even on that, like going and getting a second opinion is not fishing for the answer you want to get. That's the other thing I would say. Like if you're talking to a pastor and you really feel like it's not helping, or it's advice that is too hard, or it is something that's not actually going to help the other person engage, or whatever it is, I don't think seeking a second opinion is just trying to find the answer you want. I'm just looking for somebody to tell me what I want. No, marriage is complicated, and sometimes a second set of eyes and a second opinion might be the best thing. So I think that's the other thing is I would encourage people to don't just get one piece of advice. If there's more people that can help and you can get a little variety, it might help. It might help to just get a second or even a third opinion of things you can do. If one book didn't help, try something else. One pastor didn't help, potentially talk to somebody else. That's my other random thought.
I like it. Well, Caleb, thanks for joining me for this conversation. Really appreciate it. And
I think hats off to us. We made it through this entire conversation about divorce and marriage, and not at no point did either of us do a Borat impression of my wife. So I think already we have won the podcasting battle.
This didn't even cross my mind.
It did at one point when you said my wife, and I thought, I'm really proud of us. Neither of us have done that.
Here we go. Here we go.
Yeah, I'm glad neither of us have done that. We're cooler than I thought.
Good job. Good job, us. All right, Caleb, till next time.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. The music at the beginning and the end of the show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Let us know what you thought of this show or any of our other shows. If you want to follow the show on Twitter, our handle is @SurvivedYG. You can also email us at isurvivedyouthgroup@gmail.com. If you're interested in being on the show, drop us a line. We would love to have you. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or a review. If you enjoyed this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. We've had a couple different formats on the show, but it's a chance to talk about some of the music I've documented and share from my calendar. Once again, it's called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon. All right. I'm still shallow.
Shallow. Isn't that a song from a movie?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Movie.
Don't put this in.
Isn't Shallow a song from a movie? My jeepers, he's drunk.
Put it in at the end.
Yeah, sure it is, man. Shallow. Yeah, that's my favorite song. All right.
Oh, Lord.
All right, you ready to start?
My smoking hot wife.